Hello, everyone. Good morning. I am Rakoen Maertens from Belgium, currently living in the UK, and I will present Esperanto and United Nations Challenges on Languages and Cultures of the World. Welcome to this interesting session. We have limited time. I want to present for 2 hours, but unfortunately I only have half an hour. So let's jump into it. There are 4 parts. I start a little bit about me, then about Esperanto, the United Nations, and finally language diplomacy, the core of this material. Now, why about me? I think it's important if someone represents an NGO and goes to the United Nations to represent those ideals, you also know a bit about the person behind it, because the decisions are always guided by your background ideology and the ideas you have. So let's get started. Who am I? And what am I interested in, and what leads my diplomatic life? First of all, I'm really interested in trying to understand and learn and experience everything. Just like a good diplomat, I want to be able to imagine how other people think and experience things. But also, I love the world and its diversity and the different elements of it and how everything is connected. A bit like the Renaissance Homo Universalis, where we want to see how the largest bit, the big cosmos, is connected to the smallest atom and molecule, how social interactions work, and how that even relates to music or the sound of the wind going through the trees. You could call it a polymath. Interesting fun fact, I was just thinking this relates to Polyglot probably. Maybe at some point I have to organize a polymath gathering, would be interesting. So where does that put me on a political ideology? Again here, in my diplomatic career or development, I have been doing lots of political ideology shopping. I joined political parties, or at least groups or communities of at every point on this political scale. And this brought me to some very interesting conclusions. First of all, that often there is no clear distinction between left and right, but there are so many different ways to categorize ideologies. And if you look into the psychology of it, I'm a psychologist, you can also see that the moral foundations are a little bit different. The value on care, for example, is different, but also the value on respect on the other hand. And this makes every point really unique. And I guess it's crucial as a diplomat to try to understand this. So rather than positioning myself, I would rather say that I can easily step into the shoes of anyone on that spectrum. And to give you a concrete example of how this works in diplomacy, if you look at these organizations, they are conservative organizations that care about biodiversity in an interesting way. So I care about biodiversity and about the world. And I've always been thinking, like, how can we convince and bridge the ideological divide between ideas about climate change, for example? Now, in conservative groups, you often hear people complaining about Greta Thunberg and so on. While in liberal groups, for example, one issue might be animal rights. And maybe this liberal group might think, okay, let's ban hunting and everything related to animal pain in any way. While at the same time, maybe in that conservative society, for example, the British Association for Shooting and Conservation, you actually find the people that are most passionate about biodiversity and protecting their local ecosystem and land. So maybe when an opposing group might ban this, thinking it's good in the bigger picture, you might at the same time destroy a big biodiversity lobby within the conservative groups. And of course, the other way around works as well. By complaining about a person such as Greta Thunberg in a conservative group, you might completely forget about the global picture, about how climate change in different countries might in the end lead to the destroying of ecosystems in your own country, and in the British context, the destroying of the nice British countryside, and how everything is related. So that was just a little thought experiment to just give you the idea of how I think ideology and bridging the gap is an important element. Now, I'm doing a PhD in social psychology, focusing on misinformation, depolarization, and social norms, so very related in a way. And in there, I also try to find and diversify my academic viewpoint by being active in organizations such as the Heterodox Academy that tries to diversify the academic field. And I would recommend the book, The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, which is great in showing those differences in ideology and how everything is yet beautiful in a way. Now, I live in this beautiful place here, hence my background as well. It's down in college in Cambridge. Feels a bit like the School of Athens. Okay, enough of that. Let's go to some more interesting stuff. The Esperanto Association. What attracted me to the World Esperanto Youth Organization and the Esperanto movement in general is not necessarily the language bit. While I do like languages now, and I'm actually quite passionate about it, At the beginning, I didn't care about language. I cared about the intercultural understanding, the depolarization, the peace-building initiative of the Esperanto movement, the finding common ground. Okay, so that gave me also the experiences. So not only the academic field, but traveling around the world. I've learned so much about the human being and about collaboration. Now, let's go to Esperanto. So the first really interesting bit. What about Esperanto? So again, many people here might already know about Esperanto, some may not. But what I want to do is emphasize certain bits about the history of Esperanto that I think is important for the external relations bit. So 1859, Ludwig Zamenhof is born. 1887, he creates and publishes this book, La Unua Libro, which is the first foundation for the Esperanto language. A language that is easy to learn, easy to pronounce, but yet very advanced, so in a way very efficient. 1905, the first World Conference of Esperanto in Boulogne-sur-Mer in France. So what happens there? Now, I want to pay attention to the Declaration of Bologna. There they said, first of all, the Fundamento de Esperanto, which is a new book, a continuation of La Unua Libro, you could say, is as the sole authority, somehow the Esperanto Bible with the 16 rules of grammar and so on. But more importantly, it's not, for me, is this bit. It says that Esperanto has to be politically, religiously, and morally neutral, and also that it does not seek to replace any existing languages. And that's extremely important because a common myth about Esperanto speakers is that they want to take over the world and remove all languages. No, on the contrary, lots of work that we do is aimed towards language conservation and showing the beauty of the different languages. Now, it also says that Esperanto serves the people and tries to increase the understanding between people, but also to improve public institutions and peace building. So that was all said in 1905 in the Declaration of Bologna. Now, 1908, Hector Hodler creates the Universal Esperanto Association, UEA, based on those foundations, and put this in a large international NGO that is now still the largest Esperanto association. 1920, League of Nations. Here we go. The first large predecessor to the UN, got a nice history of 26 years. And in there, we did great Esperanto work to launch the language problem on the agenda. And at some point, we almost succeeded in making Esperanto one of the official languages of the League of Nations. Unfortunately, language politics came in, language economics, and the French had a great voice in slowing down the acceptance of Esperanto in there, and we didn't succeed in the end, but we came very far. Then, well, I jump in time a bit, 1980, my grandfather, Rakoen Maertens, becomes the president of UEA, and he's the person that invited me to learn Esperanto, and he didn't convince me because of the language, but again, he convinced me by his stories about traveling around the world and about learning of getting to know local people that he didn't have any common language with. And that was the most fascinating bit for me, that I could enhance my global network by getting to know local people that are not yet connected to the English world. Now, 2020, the Universal Esperanto Association has national member associations and pretty much, well, in many countries, as you can see on the map. But we also have members in pretty much every country in the world. So individual Esperanto speakers who are somehow active in the Esperanto movement. Good. Now, United Nations, a little bit of history about United Nations. Founded 1945, 3 pillars: peace and security, human rights, sustainable development. The main offices, an important bit, virtually every country in the world is a member of the United Nations. And this is a very important detail. I'll get back to that later. Now, UN main offices, we have offices, I'm not working for the UN by any chance, just to make clear, I don't get paid by them, I don't work for them. Good. So UN main offices everywhere in the world, but mainly in New York, Vienna, Geneva, and Nairobi. That's where the main official HQs are, or mainly in New York, you could say, where the Secretariat is hosted. Now, main UN languages, or the official languages: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. Now, English and French, unfortunately, are still the only 2 languages really used as a working language in the Secretariat. And now a fun fact in between, while making this presentation, I figured out that British English with Oxford spelling actually means British English in combination with the suffix IZE. I always thought it was ISE. So thanks to this presentation, I finally got to know what Oxford spelling is. Good news. So here we go, the United Nations system. I'm not going to try to explain this. It's quite a complex diagram, but I'll get to some of the basics. First of all, if you think about the UN, you might think about the General Assembly, where all countries gather and make these big resolutions. Now, you might also think about the Security Council, another important organ to preserve peace or to negotiate. However, I would argue, together with many other UN experts, that most of the work is actually done in ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, that is also responsible for the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. You can see them here, 17 goals ranging from no poverty to more peace, better institutions. Now, I would even say that about 80% of the UN work actually happens on this front and not on the other two. In 2015, they accepted these goals. The idea was to have an agenda to realize by 2030. It's also the successor to the previous goals, the MDGs, the Millennial Development Goals, that were set in 2010 and were aimed to be reached at 2015. Lots of progress was made. And now we have the new goals, 17 goals, 169 targets, and 230 measurable indicators. So quite an ambitious agenda, you could say. The SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Good. There are review mechanisms. There's lots of soft power involved. The UN cannot enforce anything, but most countries have a committee monitoring the SDG progress, and they often have to report to the UN on that. So do we need the UN, or did the UN fail? A question that we often hear. Let me give you an extreme example. The Rwandan genocide. Horrible thing that happened there. Unfortunately, Belgian colonial history also has a bit of a role in there. Nothing good to say, really. But there was a mission, a United Nations assistance missions in Rwanda, UNAMIR, that tried to slow down or stop the genocide, but didn't succeed. And people see that as an example of the failure of the UN. But let me give you the following. Well, first of all, a proof that I've actually been there and paid tribute to the UN peacekeepers, the Belgian UN peacekeepers that died there. But that's only a little side remark. UNDP is the United Nations Development Program. It's currently really active in Rwanda to implement its recovery and to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. And they're doing a tremendous job. I've seen the country developing. I've seen how things changed over the past 10 years. And it's incredible in a way. Now, you could ask the question 2 times. What if the UN wasn't there? So first of all, on the Rwandan genocide, do you think it would have been better without UN peacekeepers? Second, do you think the UN didn't have any role in its recovery process? Maybe it would also have recovered without the UN. But I am quite convinced, and there are lots of good books to read about this and academic papers, about how the UNDP and the UN managed to accelerate the recovery. Another example, the MDGs, as already mentioned. Read the report, one of the most successful goal-setting and international collaboration projects in the history of diplomacy. The ozone layer, the truly universal treaties developed there, and the super quick action based on scientific discoveries on the world scale, all led by the United Nations. We fixed it. We fixed the ozone layer. It's healing. We could go closer to home to COVID-19. While many countries are trying to get their own policy right, the WHO has been consistent in spreading good and latest scientific information on COVID-19, and also to debunk some of the core myths about COVID-19. Now, climate change, all the good reports, the IPBES, for example, brilliant report on biodiversity, highest scientific standards. Also the Paris Agreement, as you can see, almost every country implemented it. Unfortunately, the US is pulling out, but yet it's still a world achievement. Now, you could ask the next question. Does it have enough power? What kind of power does it have? Because all those nice things, should they not make more impact? Well, I ask the following question. If you think the UN should go towards a world government, how many countries would be a member of the UN? That's my first question. Now, if you read the UN chapter, one of the core principles is that the sovereign equality of all its members. And I think this is exactly the nice balance that the UN can make, or already makes, is that it has enough power to make countries interested. Otherwise, the reverse question, why would all countries in the world be a member of the UN if the UN was a useless mechanism that is a waste of time and resources? At the same time, I am sure that many countries have thought about leaving at some point, but then didn't, because the benefits were much bigger. However, if the UN would have more hard power instead of soft power, countries might start to leave. And then the truly universal bit about the UN might be gone. So in a way, you could even argue that it has the perfect balance between power and, or in soft power, you could say, in opposite to hard power. So lastly, I want to stress this great Secretary General who unfortunately died 2 years ago, Morgan Freeman. I was going to say, well, it's not Morgan Freeman, it's Kofi Annan. There we go. Kofi Annan was responsible for the sustainable development, no, not for the sustainable development goals, for the millennial development goals. And what he stressed and what's so important in their development is their interconnectedness. He said, for example, or he would say now with the new SDGs, that you cannot reach good health and well-being without climate action. You cannot reach the goal of no poverty without zero hunger or without good life on land. And how everything is connected. How can we get peace and human rights when we don't have quality education and so on? So he was really good in connecting everything, and it reminds me a bit of the thing I said in the beginning of the presentation of my vision of universality and getting the world and the connectedness together and understanding the bigger picture. And again, we live on planet Earth, and getting that bigger picture of how things that happen in a different country can affect your own country. I think that's especially what the UN is good at, in reminding us of that and reminding governments of this important global vision. Now, let's go to the core of this presentation, and I'm perfectly halfway there in time, I see, so it's going well. UN language policy timeline. So how has UN policy developed regarding language? Let's go to 1946. Chinese, French, English, Russian, and Spanish shall all be the official languages, they said, while English and French, the working languages. Now, as you can see, Arabic is missing there, and also the other languages are no working languages yet. Now what follows is a huge series of language diplomacy events leading up to the emancipation, you could say, of Spanish and Chinese and Russian in the UN. Until in 1973, also Arabic was finally officially added. And then it went on and on until finally in 1982, the 6 UN languages were integrated as working languages in the General Assembly and the Economic and Social Council. So this is a great achievement of many years of language diplomacy. And the UN now has its 6 official languages finally fully integrated. Well, fully, that's to say that's different, but because especially French and English is unfortunately still the only working language of the Secretariat, and lots of UN events are only in French and English, or even just in English. And interesting fact, less than 3 billion people speak English and French at a sufficient level to understand anything about the UN, and that's less than 50% of the world population. Well, that being said, multilingualism, 2017, new report by the UN Secretary General. Antonio Guterres is actually interested in multilingualism. 2017, 9 October, new resolution on multilingualism to promote and enhance multilingualism at the UN. What this shows is that it's still active. It's still a topic. The UN hasn't forgotten about multilingualism. Recently appointed a new coordinator for multilingualism. So it's alive and kicking. The debate is going on, and there are forces who care about language finally at the UN, and I guess more than ever, which is a good thing. Now, what about the interaction between the Esperanto movement and the United Nations? So let me zoom in on UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, which is based in Paris. So I could give many examples. Unfortunately, time is limited, so I'll just focus on the large achievements in UNESCO because some of them are quite remarkable. UNESCO, Montevideo, 1954, General Conference. We have a great delegate called Ivo Lapena, who lobbied hard and pushed a new resolution through. A resolution that actually took note of the member states, and note the bottom-up process here. The member states have announced their readiness to introduce or to expand teaching of Esperanto. Then, the Universal Congreso in Reykjavik, the UNESCO Director General visits the World Congress of Esperanto and expresses support, in a way, for the Esperanto movement by doing that. Then, 1985, Sofia, a new resolution. This time, more top-down, in a way. UNESCO invites member states to promote the introduction of a study program on the language problem and Esperanto, and consider use of Esperanto in diplomacy or in UNESCO affairs, in NGO work, and in other work. So this is great. So we have the resolution, the bottom-up one. Member states have announced their readiness, and an endorsement from UNESCO top-down that invites the member states. So good, we're good on that. 2017, the UNESCO Courier, the official UNESCO magazine, officially has a UN edition now. Yes, all 6 UN languages, plus an Esperanto version. In the meantime, there are some other languages as well, but we were the first. The Esperanto version was the first in addition to the official languages. Now, we have teams in New York, in Vienna, in Geneva, in Paris. We, as the Universal Esperanto Association, with some delegations of the youth branch, the World Esperanto Youth Organization. And we do a good job there. But what do we actually do? What are our aims? Do we want to have Esperanto as a UN language? Is that the final goal? Well, I would say for some maybe, but it isn't really the core thing. And as Humphrey Tonkin, a great delegate and also past president of UEA, said, if people are not aware of the problem, they are not open to the solutions. So there we go. The first part is raising awareness about the language problem, and also the language links with culture and how language is intertwined with psychology, politics, power, and economics. And then language inequality. What can we do for peace building? The immense problems that exist out of misunderstandings, but also about unequal debate, can really put the whole SDG agenda into trouble, you could say. Sustainable development without a good language policy is much more difficult. Then the second part is we should advocate for language conservation. This is because we care about language and its diversity. And by building up that reputation as someone who cares about also minority language and indigenous languages, we can also boost interest in Esperanto and then zoom out and zoom in again, having the 2 different perspectives. Finally, multilingualism at the UN. We also have a good role in pushing the implementation of all 6 UN languages. So, and finally, third part, we just have to be a good, serious diplomatic partner. As an Esperanto NGO, we have to take the role and dare to take the role of a negotiator and mediator. Often we are well placed because of our knowledge of the different cultures and people to have some kind of negotiator or diplomatic role. And finally, we don't talk about Esperanto when someone is not interested. We unfortunately, sometimes a delegate isn't really well trained in external relations and start waving green UN flags, green flags in the UN, which is, of course, quite a bad idea. Rather, we suggest to talk about Esperanto when someone really cares about the topic and asks about it and puts value in what you have to say. Otherwise, focus on the more important issues. Don't present the solution before there is awareness about the problem. So, time for my story now. Where do I come in? What is my experience? This is the anecdotal part of the presentation. So, 2012, I learned Esperanto. So that's 8 years ago now. 2012, 2017, and actually I could say still going on. It will never end. But that's a big 5 years that I did all continents and traveled around the world. Brazil, Esperanto movement, Russia, well, Slovakia, Germany, I guess, Brazil again, Korea, more Korea, Congo, I guess. Oh yeah, I see Tim Morley there, who gave the Esperanto crash course. He's also sitting in the same boat. Good, we're on the same boat. Good stuff. Any case, what I want to show is I traveled around a bit. Oh yeah, Togo. Sorry, yeah. Quick error. Did I say Congo? I meant Togo. Of course. Well, good. Anyways, there we go. Good experience. Okay. Also, yeah, everyone here, they're all Esperanto speakers, by the way. We're all connected, and I think it shows again that the unique ability of the Esperanto community to both show and emphasize that diversity and that language and cultural difference between the people, as well as showing how we are all connected and how we actually have more in common than things that divide us. It's a beautiful experience. So at the same time, I was active at Ghent University. I'm studying experimental psychology. And because of my Esperanto activities, I got interested in the UN. I joined some kind of UN youth movements, starting with the UN Youth Association of Flanders, going on with Ghent Model United Nations, which I founded. Great fun, did lots of simulations of the UN. Until then, finally, TEJO, the World Esperanto Youth Organization, or in Esperanto, Tut Monda Esperantista Junularo Organizo, they recruited me. They knocked on my door and said, okay, Rakoen, it's time to stop those simulations, time to do something real. Do you want to go to UNESCO? You want to go to Saudi Arabia and represent us at the UNESCO NGO forum? I thought, well, that sounds quite nice. Let's do it. Let's do it. So there I was, got my first delegate badge. Very proud of that. Still have it. And as soon as I arrived, actually in the queue for the visa in the country, there was some delegate from Nigeria. I was talking to him, and then he asked me which organization I was from. I told the Universal Esperanto Association. He said, "Oh, great, good people. I've worked with them a couple of times, and really that they are good people." And that's when I realized the important work that the people before me did, and I'm just there thanks to all the good work and diplomacy they did in the past years. Now, to say a bit more about that adventure, the first day was very surreal. It was I don't know how to tell you this, but basically it was a full day of fun park experiences, going to watch giraffes playing mini golf and in a suit in 42 degrees Celsius. Yeah, quite interesting, I would say. However, then the next day the conference actually started, Youth and Their Social Impact, and it became quite serious quite quickly. There, how quickly I realized how large the language problem is. It was very strange. After 5 years of traveling around in the Esperanto community, I almost had this idea that it was easy to communicate with other cultures and other people, that it was easy to understand them and have a fluent conversation. But there I quickly realized that at the pinnacle of diplomacy, at the UNESCO conference, at the UN-based meeting, the communication was so terribly bad. There were debates with people that had just not enough language capacity in that little specific language, often in English, while they didn't really speak English. The translators did a tremendous job, but still it was so difficult, and sometimes they just failed to translate the right word. And for the first time, I really started to realize how large of a thing this is at the UN, and it was interesting. But I was not the only one to notice. In the corridor, people were discussing, oh, that pitching contest there. Was that really fair? Because that one person was much more sufficient in English. I was much more convincing because of the language proficiency, not really because of the project. And then I came in and said, like, yeah, I think that indeed is a problem. You are right. Good thinking. So you see, and then people start being interested in what I'm doing. And then I tell a bit about Esperanto and so on. But here, it's an active topic, not only for us. I met the Director General, Rina Bokova, there. In the meantime, we have a different one. It's the new Director General is Audrey Azoulay. And then the Esperanto movement kind of liked my work there, for which I'm thankful. And then they invited me to the UNESCO General Conference, the 39th one in Paris. As somehow, oh yes, a very important element I forgot to mention. You're never alone. You always have delegation. And without the delegation, you are worthless. You really need a delegation and good coordination between that. So everything I say here in this personal experience, Bart, is mainly thanks to the great experience I had with the delegations I've worked with on those events. So here we go. Somehow I managed to get the floor and give a speech at the UNESCO General Conference. How did that happen? Well, that's a good question. Actually, I already had left the UNESCO. I don't have much time, unfortunately, for the full anecdote. But I already had left for a different conference in Oxford. And suddenly I got a message. Do you want to speak at UNESCO? We applied for it and we got the floor. I said, well, yeah, that sounds good. And said, okay, get back here in Paris. But in the meantime, I was already in Britain. Then, just the day before I had to give the speech, they gave me a draft of a speech. And while it was okay, it was well written, I really didn't like it. It didn't fit with what I really wanted to say. So I wanted to write my own speech, a new speech. So on the train, Sunday evening, on Monday morning, I had to give the speech. Sunday evening, I took the Eurostar from London to Brussels, writing the speech. I arrived at around midnight in Brussels. There was no Thalys to Paris anymore, so I had to find a place to stay. I just bought the cheapest and then the most nearby youth hostel just to actually stay in the lobby and practice my speech the entire night, pacing around while the person in the lobby was looking at me, thinking, well, what is this man doing? Then I took the first Thalys to Paris, pacing through the train, trying to not fall asleep. In the end, I end up at UNESCO HQ just on time to give the speech. And then they tell me, well, you're a bit down on the speakers list. You have to wait a few more hours. Again, trying to stay awake, trying to pace around UNESCO HQ. And finally, there I am giving that first big speech. It was a very special moment. Afterwards, I remember falling asleep in the General Assembly Hall and waking up late in the evening, only to realize everyone had already left the UNESCO building. And I was there almost alone. The security guards then asked me what I'm doing there that late. I said, well, I fell asleep. Didn't really believe me. Anyways, good. That worked well. I got on the cover page of the Esperanto magazine. And I think that kind of launched my Esperanto diplomacy career in a way. So you can watch the speech also online. Yeah, it's on YouTube. Many events followed. There was a UNESCO event on celebrating Zamenhof, life of Zamenhof. I got invited to Tolfa, a little village next to Rome, by the ambassador Giorgio Novello. I went to Moscow for a science conference, UNESCO in science as a common good of humankind. Me as a scientist, so it fitted well. I could present some of my research on fake news even. It was quite interesting. But also the debate on language policy within science was quite active. Sergei Lavrov was there as well. So quite important stuff. Of course, in the end, I ended up in New York at the UNHQ. How could it be any different after this path? And it started with the ECOSOC Youth Forum, again with a good delegation. Fortunately, I now realize I forgot to put a photo of that delegation. But we ended up sitting in front in a very nice trusteeship room where we got a really nice position together with 1,000 other people, but somehow we got there in this front seat. Again, I realized this was due to the great work we did in the previous years, the collaboration with other partners. And again, I was just standing on the shoulder of giants. So here we go, high-level political forum. I thought, yeah, let's try to organize something now. Let's try to organize an event. Let's try to take the lead. So I used my contacts in Belgium and at the Belgian mission to organize a side event on circular economy. And now you could think like, hey, how does this relate to Esperanto? Well, that's not the case. That's not what matters here. What matters here is we get seen as a trusted partner. And that people think that Esperanto Association, they are good people. They are actually serious. And then later they invite us to other events to speak about our project. And so it goes. So Igmio is one of the mechanisms we're active in with the World Esperanto Youth Organization. And through Igmio, the UN contacted Igmio to ask to nominate a few potential keynote speakers for the next UN ECOSOC Youth Forum. Now, in the large list of speakers, someone nominated me. And somehow the UN thought, probably based on my UNESCO speech as well, that I would be a good keynote speaker. So here we go, the ultimate accomplishment, I would say, for that year, was the president of the Economic and Social Council inviting me to deliver a keynote address. And it took me until the day itself, well, it took them, I would say, because the program wasn't published, to announce that I'm actually giving a speech just before the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. So basically, that also meant I had to cut my speech from 12 minutes to 6 minutes. I had to go to all extra security measures, all kind of revisions of my speech. And it wasn't ready by the time I had to give the speech. Yet I somehow managed to do it and figure something out. And here I am, the same trusteeship chamber, great delegation of TEJO. And here it is, the panel, with me sitting there next to the Secretary General, the Chef de Cabinet, the ECOSOC president. It was surreal again, giving the speech about equality, empowered, and the youth, how they have to work together, bridge the ideological divide. Everything I said about myself in the beginning, I tried to implement that in a way, this vision of life, because they wanted me as an individual to speak, and not me necessarily as a representative of the NGO, which was quite interesting. So I had this debate, should I mention the NGO and language policy at all or not? And then I realized, with the cut in 6 minutes in my speech, it was best at that moment to leave it out. So I didn't talk about Esperanto and languages. Now, how did that work out? In the end, I had my moment of fame. People wanted photos and so on. But also, lots of people asked me, what are you doing with the NGO? And some even invited me to talk at their embassy without asking what I'm up to. So somehow I managed to circumvent that main unveiling of what I'm doing. But people got interested and wanted to know more. Afterwards, they came and asked questions. I guess it's always a balance. Maybe if I had a few more days, I could have implemented some language policy stuff in the speech. But it was not the crucial bit. The crucial speech bit was getting a good impression out there as a representative and delegate of the World Esperanto Youth Organization that could then be utilized for other things. And of course, a nice private picture with Antonio Guterres, and as the cherry on the cake. Oh wait, there's an after movie. There's an after movie on YouTube. You can watch it, as there is no time to show it now. And as cherry on the cake, somehow I ended up bumping into Ban Ki-moon, the previous Secretary General of the United Nations in Cambridge. And I showed him a photo of me and Antonio Guterres, and he kind of liked it. And afterwards, he kept giving me more and more wine, enough wine to get me started with talking about UN language policy. And it was a brilliant evening that got me some new contacts in the language policy domain at UN. So here, everything is related, and so one big story, one big event. So yeah, I think I'm perfectly on time. So some final questions before the end. Thank you for listening, everyone. So I got some questions here. Let's see. Oh, lots of questions. So one question is, how could the UN be neutral using only a few languages among those spoken from the different folks being part of the UN? Well, that's a good question. What the first question is, what is neutrality? In fact, the UN has lots of problems with neutrality. If you look at the Security Council and the Security Council reforms and the veto rights, it is never equal. Also, while every member has an equal vote, of course, their soft power is not equal. You can see that if you are in a meeting at the General Assembly, and you even among the youth delegates, when you have a youth delegate from a large and powerful country, somehow they get more invitations. They get more influence in the policy making. It is never really entirely neutral. So yes, I guess you're absolutely right. And we need to. That's the first step, I guess, is in implementing the 6 UN languages fully and getting the most out of that. Then in the end, I mean, the final goal is a better, more inclusive policy that is more neutral. Unfortunately, the UN is still based on those large power structures, and the UN is not perfect. They are actually doing now, so 75 years of the UN this year. They are gathering lots of information from different governments and people on launching next steps to improve and reform the UN. Have a look at that, UN 75 and their reform agenda, because they do want to tackle this neutrality problem. But yes, more is needed, and Esperanto would certainly help. Good. Another question. How can we open Esperanto to the masses? The community is rather small, and it may look weird and hermetic from outside. And that's an interesting point. And in fact, often you get that reaction at the UN even. Sometimes they see me as a good partner for projects, but then when we start a conversation and I tell them I speak Esperanto, sometimes they react like, oh, this is brilliant. But sometimes they look at me like, yeah, I thought you were a serious person, but now you say you speak Esperanto. Yeah, no, probably not. So how do I respond to that? So the first thing is, I mean, there are lots of myths also going around. For example, that Esperanto wants to take over the world, or that Esperanto is an anarchist revolution. There's a lot of fake news out there trying to, and there are some anarchists in the Esperanto movement as well, but they also have the opposite people. It's a diverse community. So how do we solve this? And how do we also get people to learn and appreciate Esperanto at a different scale? Well, I guess if you can show, for example, this UNESCO magazine I've shown, the UNESCO Courier, and show that Esperanto officially was endorsed by UNESCO and the member states at that time, and that this magazine can be used to confer Esperanto information about the cultures of the world, and be used in classrooms to teach about language, but also about the cultures and about relations. This is a great step. If you can show this magazine to people, people become aware that it's not just a weird thing. It's something the UN is backing. It's something that has value, that can be used for advanced communications. That's one thing. Another thing is that's one of the exact reasons we do the UN work. By giving a keynote speech, by giving those sessions and providing evidence of what the Esperanto movement is capable of. For example, by presenting our projects in Africa and the Esperanto movement in Africa, people start to realize, okay, there is more behind this. There is actually some peace-building value. It's not just some kind of fanatic movement. So simply, instead of arguing, no, we are good people, trust us. You just show them the projects, and don't tell them why we are good people. You show them. And that's a thing. And then further on, if at some point one of the UN agencies would start to use Esperanto as one of the working languages, or at least one of the recognized languages, I think it could go quickly. Some countries, some schools already implement it and teach it. There are some university degrees that implement a course on Esperanto. So it is already serious. You can refer to that. And if we further enhance that, as Esperanto is more accepted on the international diplomatic scene, I'm sure it will get more accepted and get more traction all around the world, even without the huge financial power behind it. Okay, let's go to the next question. So what are the actual benefits of being part of the UN? Is a question that's been asked. So what are the benefits of being part of the UN? I guess there are different ways to interpret this question. One way, it depends a bit on if you would have a microphone, I would give it to you to clarify it. But let's go to the two main interpretations. One, as a country being part of the UN, I guess it gives you a huge diplomatic platform to get connected to the international projects and bring out your voice and have an influence. But not only that, to get the support from the UN on implementing sustainable development goals, for example, on peacekeeping operations. If you look at, for example, Cyprus, they have a peacekeeping border endorsed to keep peace in the country. It works quite well. But also, if you look at the sustainable development, UNDP and Rwanda, for example, so lots of benefit of being a part of the UN, working together with the UN and negotiating there. And as an NGO, that's probably the second question. Maybe that was the question you wanted to ask. How do we benefit from being a consultative partner of the UN as the Esperanto movement? And then the question, there are many responses to that. So first of all, it raises the understanding and the prestige of Esperanto and the language problems behind it, about the language, culture, relation, exactly those three parts. So there's three aims and that we are trying to accomplish. That's one of the things, but also on the local level. I mean, if I go to the Minister of Culture in Flanders, for example, and I ask for support for an Esperanto project or a language teaching or language diversity project, it does really help if I can also say, like, look, I was keynote speaker at the UN, and we have had endorsements by UNESCO resolution X and Y to teach Esperanto in the member states. We have to adhere to that. You can even point them to the resolution and say, you don't have an Esperanto course in your country. Well, this resolution say you should investigate it. It's a serious thing. So this is one example on why it's beneficial for us to be active there as well. So yeah, there were both sides. So do I still have any time left? No, it's 45. This is it. Thank you so much all for listening and tuning in. And if you have any questions, find me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to respond. Thank you.